Hi, I'm Edward Jie. I'm the CEO of Gaofeng Advisory Company. We are a strategy and management consulting firm with roots in China. Recently, we have started a new initiative, which is to offer services, advisory services to family offices. And we are doing this in partnership with Dillon Hale, who has incredible amount of experience in working with and offering advisory services to family offices in the general region of Asia as well as in the USA. So today we are very glad to have Dylan with us. And what I like to do is to pose a few questions about family offices to Dylan, and let's listen to what Dylan's point of view is going to be. Welcome, Dylan. Thank you for your time. We appreciate having you on the call with us, and we'd like to, talk to you about family offices.
Thank you very much, Ed. It's a pleasure being here, and thanks for the opportunity to contribute to this important field and subject that seems to be very popular at the moment with a number of families.
Yeah, you are a strategic family office advisor and consultant. What does that mean, actually?
So essentially, it's a role where I provide an independent perspective to families, entirely independent perspective, focusing on the complexities that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis in the medium term and the long term. And I'm essentially leveraging my experience, having worked in a few family offices before, to be able to provide practical solutions to them. And again, from an entirely independent perspective, and also importantly, focused on strategic issues. So the large issues that tend to be complex in nature at family offices, that's really where my sweet spot is.
Would you say that's how you differentiate with others in the field?
Yeah, so the differentiation comes from understanding the theory around family office practice, but also importantly, understanding the actual practice, having been involved over an almost 20-year period working for two large family offices, understanding what works and what doesn't work. And also learning from the mistakes that were made that I have seen in both the families I'd worked for, but also other families, as well as the successes that I've witnessed in those families, and bringing that to the table to service the families that I'm focused on at the moment.
Right. I understand there's a lot of confusion among families about what a family office actually is. So in simple terms, how would you describe what a family office it actually should be?
Absolutely, it is a very confusing term. To make matters worse, the whole investment management industry has utilized this term as well to sell a particular product or a particular fund, and so that's just added to the confusion. But essentially, a family office is the entity that serves a single family or some related families only, and it serves them by catering to their bespoke needs on a daily basis, but also importantly, managing their wealth over the long term. And I always think one of the key fundamental facets of a family office is to protect the wealth that has been created in the family business. And I think that's quite a key point, in that the family business is separate to the family office. It is true that you often find a family office operating out of the family business, but essentially its function is separate. And its function is really about preserving, capturing the wealth that has been created in the family business for the long term.
That's very helpful, because I think in general, there's a lot of this misperception or confusion between the two. So it's very important to differentiate it, right?
And it's a question that comes up constantly. And what you find is that the better examples of successful families are where they've separated the family office function away from the family business function. for a number of reasons. The first is the skill set and the philosophy and the approach that's required in the family office is different to what's required in the family business. The family business is a medium of wealth that has been created, and it has essentially a finite time frame, whereas the family office, in ideal circumstances, is created to manage multi-generational wealth over a much longer time frame. So I think that sort of separation of the two is important. And just to my previous point, the family office's role in a best case scenario is to capture the wealth that was created in the family business, and then to diversify that wealth along various asset classes, as well as globally through various investments and investment vehicles. And that way to spread the risk away from the operating business and the operating family exposures.
Yeah, so I come across quite a few people who have come to me and asked the fundamental question: how much wealth does a family or an entrepreneur need to have in order to set up a family office?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, and I think in different parts of the world, you require different starting points. A lot of that has to do with the environment you're operating in, cost of labor, cost of services, and so on and so forth. But in general, I think you would need approximately $100 million of investable capital to invest, and that means capital that's actually at hand, perhaps not immediately, but certainly within a finite time period that you can utilize to diversify away from your family business. Below that, there's sort of a gray zone between, let's say, 80 and 100. But below that, I think it's really a case of outsourcing to best-in-class external providers. And you would still have your family office framework, but essentially you're outsourcing the management of that capital externally, because there are some fantastic providers who essentially provide the most efficient service at that level.
Yeah, that also leads me to another question that I often come across as well, is that, when is it best to have a family office or to use the services of a third party like a private bank?
Yeah, I think all families still make use of the services of providers like private banks, private wealth managers, fund managers, so on and so forth. It also ties into the question of insourcing versus outsourcing. Yeah. And ultimately, I think you insource where the capital that you have gives you the ability to hire in best-in-class talent, because ultimately it's your capital and you want to ensure that it is looked after by the best quality, the best experience, the best skill set that you can obtain. So if you have sufficient firepower in your family office, you can go out there and you can hire a top-class team that have experience from investment banks, from private banks, from fund managers, and bring them in-house, and you can afford to pay them and you can afford to incentivize them as well. In cases where you feel that it's a very expensive exercise for you, then it's better to consider the outsourced options. There are a number of what they call OCIOs out there, outsourced CIOs, and there are some very credible ones that act for many family offices. And of course, there are multi-family offices as well that exist. Yeah. Those propositions are probably more appropriate to you in that case. I did talk about that 100 million mark. Yeah. Generally speaking, for a CIO of high quality, you're looking at about $1 million a year in terms of the cost, and that is essentially 1% of that $100 million mark. And that's also one of the reasons I mentioned $100 million, because from there on you can really afford to start hiring in talent of that quality.
Right. You have advised a large number of family offices so far. And based on your experience, what would you say would be the most important element to a successful family office?
I think it goes to that prior point. It's really about firstly the people. the people that you can outsource to or hire in to your family office. It's a function of human capital first and foremost, and then secondly, I think governance is critically important, ensuring that you have a governance framework in place for the operating of your family office, but also for the investment of your capital, and in particular, how decisions are made, and the process around the voting of the allocation of the capital. All those really important governance issues captured in a governance framework. I think that's of second most importance, and it's important in the current generation, but it's arguably even more important in the next generation, because as you move down generations, those generations are removed from when the wealth was created, and their values may not be 100% aligned. And so if you have a really robust governance framework in place, you essentially protect the family against itself and bad decisions that might be made in later generations. So yes, just to summarize then, I would say it's really about the people and about the governance.
Conversely, based on your vast experience in advising the family office, what would be the common mistakes or the biggest common mistakes that you have seen?
Yeah, I think where there's a lack of understanding of the function of the family office and what it needs to achieve for the family.
Right.
A lot of families make the mistake of looking at the family office as yet another commercial venture, and they have created their pot of gold, their wealth through one business. And then they look at the family office as a purely commercial opportunity again, and that's not really what a family office is. That's one big mistake I've seen. The second is where they really do not focus on the sometimes what's called the boring stuff, which is that governance work. Entrepreneurs are really creative, highly creative individuals. They also are people in a hurry. They don't tend to want to focus on what they would consider these boring issues, but those are really, really important issues for the long term. So mistakes around that, and to the other point is not hiring in the best talent you can afford. Not hiring in the best talent, compromising on that talent. Those are really important mistakes that I've seen made.
You mentioned earlier that the passing on of wealth from one generation to another is a critical function of a properly designed family office. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, and how does it affect or change the concept of family offices?
It's the most critical component. We're all aware of the term shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, and I think that what the family office structure does, what the family office entity does, is it provides the ability to break that cycle. If that family office has been created with the right governance framework in place, which captures exactly that. It captures a mandate to create perpetual capital, so capital that will last past those generations. And the way that you operate a family office like that, and the way that you invest through a family office like that, is very different to just focusing on the next 20, 30 years, right? And just focusing on outsized returns in the next 10 or 20 years. It's quite different. That doesn't mean you don't focus on it as well, you do, but you're taking a much longer term framework to break that cycle. You are also ensuring that you're educating the next generation in what family office best practice is. And that of course is another area that we focus on, is the education of that second, third, fourth generation, to prepare them for leadership roles or not leadership roles, but to give them an understanding of what's required, what's important, so that they are prepared for the stewardship of the wealth in future. I think those are pretty critical elements.
So what you're saying is that design of a family office is not only about the tactics or the techniques, but also importantly about education and the transfer of knowledge and information and best practices, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's It's the soft stuff that's the hard stuff. You know, you're dealing with personalities, and you know, I think of my children and how they're different. You know, some are more creative, others are more structured, and some are interested in pursuing a profession, and others are not. And so you have to cater to those personalities. You don't want to change those personalities, but they, in a family of wealth, they do need to be able to be stewards of that capital. And they may not even have a leadership role in the family office, but they will certainly have representation in the family council. And at some point, they will take leadership in a family council situation. And so they need to be fully aware of how the family office operates, how it's been designed, why it's been designed, and why it operates the way it does, and also have a good generic understanding of the asset classes and how they work and how they relate to one another.
Right. So Dillon, I know that you have a lot of experience advising family offices in the Asian region, in particular in Greater China. And as we know, China is where a lot of new wealth has evolved in the last decade or so. What's your general observation about the state of situation of family offices in the Asian region, particularly in Greater China, versus, let's say, what's going on in let's say America, where you also have had a lot of experience. What would you, how would you compare the development paths, if there's any difference between these two regions?
I think the one thing that really stands out to me thinking of that question is the amount of wealth that has been created over the last 30 to 40 years in China compared to anywhere else in the world. You've seen a generation, usually the first generation, sometimes a second as well, become enormously wealthy over this period. And I think we're at an inflection point in China in particular, where it's a case now of how do we protect that wealth? How do we capture that wealth in the best form possible and pass that on? And additionally, how do we prepare our kids for that wealth in future? Whereas if you look at the US, you look at a lot of families there are probably now more in their second, third, fourth generation. Certainly there has been good growth, but not to the same extent. You find that in the Chinese context, you have values that work for you in your family office, because one well-known value across Asia is filial piety, right? You respect your elders, you're part of a community, and you're aware of that community. You don't see those values in places like the US. So that's, I think, a major advantage in terms of family office creation and evolution in Asia compared to elsewhere, and that you can harness that to your benefit when you create your family office strategy, when you create your family office governance. It's a really big positive for you as against others. So those are just the two of the things that really stand out to me. I think the other major advantage in mainland China is the economy has been doing so well. Yeah. And there's been an enormous amount of entrepreneurial activity on the technology side, and again, wealth creation there. And I would argue that there's less of a case for needing to invest as broadly or diversely offshore as, for instance, if you were sitting in the US or England or one of these other economies.
Right. Excellent. Dillon, that's been fantastic talking to you so far, and appreciate very much your inputs. I know that you bring a lot of experience and knowledge about family offices, and you're available to help, in case any family office or any entrepreneurs have any questions about this. At the end of this video, we will have the contact information of Dillon yourself, as well as Gaofeng Advisory Company. So thank you for your time, Dillon. Appreciate very much your inputs. And do you have any final words for our audience?
I think that thank you for the opportunity, and I'm very excited about working with you in relation to this very important topic in this very important area. I think a lot of families are confused. They get bombarded by advice, most times from non-independent parties, who are trying to sell them a fund or a product. So I think that we're sitting in a unique position to be able to help them and leverage our mutual experience, yours in the corporate side and mine in the family office side, to provide solutions that are very bespoke to families in our part of the world here in Asia.
That's fantastic, Dillon. It's been a pleasure talking to you today, and appreciate your time. And for those of you who are interested in knowing more about our service offering in family offices, please do contact us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Edward.
Thank you, Dillon.
Bye.